where does transgenderism and being a child meet? This is a question that comes up often. It elicits a lot of emotional response from those on all different aspects. I don't believe, not that I've seen it myself, that there is more than two sides of this community. It appears to me that when it comes to subjects such as children, there seems to be 8, 9, 10, 12 sides to this conversation. Make it really simple and boil it down to this. Children are the future, and you got to protect your future. Everything you do with a child needs to be measured. It needs to be rational. It needs to be contemplated. It needs to be cogitated. You need to be very cautious with movements you make in children because of the damage. We all know this. We all know that there is so much damage done through our childhood that we then have to move forward. And if we're aware of it enough, we heal it. We can hopefully heal it in our adult life. And sometimes we never heal from damage done in our childhood. That damage can come from intention. That damage can come from lack of intention. That damage can come from just life. It was not something anyone intended to happen, but something happens and the child is exposed to something, and that forever changes their perspective of the world. By the way, good things can happen that way too. Something very good can happen, and that can change the perspective of the world for that child in a good way too. So children are highly malleable, especially when we're very young. When we're very young, we're malleable, especially to our imagination. And we're not always sure what's imaginary and not. If you remember back to your own childhood and you're running around, you're pretending to be a thing, a princess, a firefighter, a superhero, whatever you are, there were times that you knew that you were imagining as you got older, and there was other times that you weren't sure if that's what just saying it and doing it made you that thing. But as you got older, you started to unfold and realize, well, there's things I can imagine, and then there's things that I need to do. Now, raising a child from the mystery school's perspective is that you want your child to understand that they can be anything that they are capable of being, not anything they want to be, anything they're capable of being. But whatever that thing is that they're capable of being will require effort, work, and responsibility. So I have a daughter and she says, I want to be an astronaut. I said, well, if you're capable of being an astronaut, you can be an astronaut. That means you're going to have to go to a lot of school, a lot of training. You're going to have to take all the tests and pass all the degrees that you need. And you're going to have to go to astronaut training camp. And if you do all those things, there's a good chance you can be an astronaut. There's no guarantee you'll be an astronaut. This is the way you can make your best opportunity to be an astronaut. But to turn around and say, when I grow up, I want to be a prince or a princess. Okay. The question I would say is, how do you think you might do that? Now, of course, if they're a little tiny kid, little kid that has, very few thoughts, the conversation is not going to be much of a conversation. You might approach it slightly differently. But as they get older, you want to instill in the child that getting things in life means effort and action, and correct effort, not just any effort, but correct effort. And that if you take correct effort and you really want something, it's not that you'll be guaranteed you'll have it, but you're definitely going to make the odds of it happening better for you. So the way we raise our children, how we express our thoughts, feelings, and opinions about life, about God, about the universe, about other human beings, children are sponges. They absorb that stuff. And because of that, every parent on earth should be very, very cautious in how they treat children. And any hypocrisy the child will see. So for those parents who are, hypocritical about certain aspects of your life, the parent, for example, that smokes and then tells the child, oh yeah, but don't smoke, it's bad for you. You're not telling the child not to smoke. You're telling the child to lie when they smoke. You're not expressing to them they shouldn't smoke. You're saying to the child, ignore the rules, and if lying is the approach to get around what the problem is, then do what I'm doing. You're not actually teaching the child to not be a hypocrite. You're teaching the child to be a hypocrite. So that would be one aspect. You say, be careful in the way you raise your children. Don't raise hypocrites. Raise your child to be in integrity, because from integrity, they can live their life with strength, and from an internal strength, not the strength of a muscle, but the strength of what they need to do within their character and then their spirit and their will to move forward. But if you teach people to be hypocrites, you're not teaching them the strength. You're teaching them weakness. You're teaching them avoidance. You're not teaching them to become a better human being. You're teaching them to misrepresent who they are and hopefully trick other human beings so that they can get what they want. Don't recommend you do that with children. In general, I don't recommend that you expose children to information they cannot possibly handle because they don't have the discernment. So, where does transgenderism and raising a child come in? It's a very difficult subject and a very tricky subject. If you were to say that children should be educated about this through the public school system, I would probably challenge that. Your public school system, private school is a different matter. I mean, that's choices you make. But public school is where society, whether they have resources or not, are able to send their children to get a basic education. That's the theory behind public schools. That basic education needs to be as clean, precise, unpolitical, and unbiased towards all information as possible. It should be strictly factually based until such time as the child moving into adolescence can start to question from their own perspective and their own thoughts, has some discernment, when they can turn around and challenge and say, yes, but I disagree, and then the teacher can actually have a conversation that is not exactly equal, but more equal on its terms, which would mean, generally speaking, when it comes to ideologies that are not based purely in factuality, for example, reality. Gravity is what gravity is. It doesn't matter what your ideology is. Gravity works the same way. We can study gravity. Doesn't matter if what your political spin is. Gravity works a certain way. Those are things that are brought into the education. This is how gravity works. This is how a combustion engine works. This is how electricity works. This is the English language. This word means, this is what a pronoun is. This is what an adjective is. These are things that are just based in factuality. And of course, we could say things with English is an evolving language. Things change. Of course, all true. But there's facts behind that. Math, 1 + 1 = 2. You know, those are factual things. I would say that if they were to ask me, how would you raise a child in a public school setting, is stick to the facts and avoid all ideologies. From the mystery school perspective, public schools should not be involved in any political movements. They should not be involved in any movements whatsoever, much like we aren't involved in any movements whatsoever. Your job is to deliver facts and nothing else. And those facts have to be grounded in reality. Once you want to discuss ideology, political, which transgenderism, there's an aspect that's very political. It's a political belief. It's not necessarily fact. Just like those who may oppose transgenderism will have a political aspect to why they're opposing, or a religious aspect. Religion, politics, ideologies, they belong to the older children, perhaps in high school, and perhaps even further in high school, maybe when you're getting into the higher grades, when you can start to say, hey, here's a concept about this. The objective of a teacher who really wants to teach, and I'm not talking about elementary school. Elementary school, stick to the facts. When you get older and you want to teach a child who isn't grown up and to be an adult yet, more about life, and you want to expose them to other things, your objective is to not necessarily, for all the teachers out there, be right. Your objective is to get that student to understand why they think they're right and to challenge that. And so you as a teacher, as I do, as a Hermetic teacher all the time, need to be able to take on the challenge that you're wrong. Take on the challenge that what you're professing is correct. And then if they say, yeah, but you're wrong, then that's the debate. And the debate is the teaching point. It doesn't mean you're wrong or right, by the way. It just means that debate, that confrontation, that wrong, right, wrong, that's what teaches a person to think critically and to be open-minded. And your job is to expose people to be open-minded, not to be closed-minded. And unfortunately, in the teaching profession, I am observing a lot of pure indoctrination. It's not about being open-minded. And I don't just mean about transgenderism. I mean about everything. There's just pure indoctrination happening. So, in terms of teaching children, you got to be careful. You got to be careful because, unfortunately, my assessment is that children have been not only damaged by COVID, they're being damaged by these movements badly. And a lot of these movements that declare themselves to be useful and helpful are going to be the thing that is looked upon many years from now as the thing that did the most damage to those children. There's an aspect of the transgender community, the LGBT community, that is about exposing children to hypersexuality, which is completely inappropriate. It is, when I look at, for example, we see some of the actions, the words spoken for example, a gay pride event, and not all of them, but some of them, and you see acts being simulated on a stage in front of thousands of people on the street, which is a public place that we all share, and you're exposing children to that, and then you don't take responsibility for what you're doing to that child. See, that's where you have a problem. The exposing of sexual acts is the purview of adults and should never be done to any child. Whoever is the minder, and I don't know who that is, of what is acceptable in terms of what is representative of us and what isn't, there doesn't seem to be anyone there. So a person who is extremely hedonistic, what appears to me, can enter the community and under the guise of you must accept me because I'm part of this community, can then basically expose society and people to their probably the worst sides of their inner desires. They can expose, and under the guise you can't call them on that. And so if you call them on that, you're immediately labeled as anti-trans. But it's like, it's not anti-trans, it's anti-that, whatever that is. So when it comes to children, you got to be careful. You got to treat them well. And there are times that it's appropriate to expose children to information, but very young children should not be exposed to this. If society has made a mistake, the biggest mistake we have made is that we are treating children like they're adults. They are still children, and they're still developing and growing in ways that are different from the way an adult develops and grows. And we are treating them like, for example, you would not think it's appropriate for a straight man to take his 2 6-year-old daughters to a strip club and watch women strip and talk about oral sex. No. So if that's not okay with straight people, it's not okay for anybody. There are lines here. And I know even within the community itself, there are schisms on this understanding. So again, we go back to, do you support the transgender community when it comes to children? I don't know what you're asking me to support. The mystery school doesn't understand. If you're saying that all behaviors, as long as we call them trans, which it appears to be as the offering, all behaviors, as long as we call it trans supportive, is acceptable? No. No. Because not all behaviors are correct for society and for people. What you do behind a private closed door is vastly different from what you do in front of the public. And so there are key differences there. And so a part of what I would say with the trans community with children is you need to address that. You need to say, like, hey, this is how we feel about that. And maybe society will still disagree with you. Maybe they won't. But the way it's being offered right now is there does not seem to be any boundary or any limitation on that expression, which means you can behave any way you want towards children, expose them to anything you want, and manipulate them in any way you want. And if it's called out as a negative, you're calling out the entire community. And I would say to the community, if that's the case, it's very immature. It's time for the community to grow up and accept that there are limitations on all of our sexual expressions in the world. We don't just get to behave any way we want in our sexual preferences everywhere we want, whenever we want. That's not how that works. So there's aspects within there that, again, an individual who says, I'm part of that community, can have very differing beliefs from another person standing beside him saying, I'm from that community too. So again, there's a lot of things that have to sort of be cleaned up within that part of the community. But when it comes to children, the transgender community should understand, like anyone else, people are going to protect their children. They're going to protect their children with the most force of anything. That will elicit the most force. So an intelligent movement would say, we need to move cautiously, because when has a mother or father bear ever been okay with you messing with their cubs? Never. So you need to develop the trust of mom and dad so that you're saying, and let me approach your child, I won't harm them. And the transgender community, again, sort of erases that. In fact, there's an aspect of the community that tries to offer that parents are bad. And that's another thing, that if you say, if supporting transgenderism means I have to identify parents as a bad influence to my children or to our children, the answer once again is no. And so for kids, be careful. Be careful. They're too important to everyone on the planet to just sort of approach them willy-nilly with no appreciation of what the response that comes from trying to influence children about anything in life. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're going to try and influence children, you're going to have a lot more eyes put upon you. And people are going to be, and rightly so, very, very concerned. That doesn't mean that they disagree with you, but they're of course going to approach this with concern, apprehension, and a critical eye. And you're going to have to convince the mothers and the fathers of the world that the approach of this information to your children, that approaching the child with this information is good. And if you're getting resistance, you need to adjust the way you're approaching the situation, because that resistance is coming from a place of love, not a place of hate. They love their children, so they're going to defend their children. And if they perceive you as a threat, they're going to defend their children even harder. So if you're part of a movement and you feel that children need to understand something, do not approach the parents as a threat. Talk to them. Be gentle. Explain why it's better. And a part of the transgender community is there's a lack of explaining why it's better that's going on. There's just, you need to comply or else you're a bad person. Inevitably, the result of this is going to be failure. There's no other conclusion. All movements that are based on authoritarianism and not better ideas fail. It just takes time. It's just a matter of time. You know, even the worst movements, the Nazi movement, it was massive, it was huge, and then it failed. Slavery was massive, it was huge, and then it failed. We can go down the list of everything that was purported to be correct, that wasn't, that was imposed through authoritarianism, that failed. How many giant cultures and civilizations have fell who tried to rule the population and rule the hearts and minds of the people with an iron fist that succeeded? Pretty much none of them. They always fail. So for the transgender community, if the only way you can make your movement work is through authoritarianism over people and children, I'm going to tell you, you're getting in the boat with the failures. Don't do that. Be more peaceable in the approach. And yes, accept there are people that won't be peaceable back to you. I understand that just because I'm telling you to be peaceable doesn't mean that other people are going to be peaceable to you. But I will tell you that love wins out over hate and fear. So if you can shift more into whoever these representatives are that appear to be, in many cases, not so nice people, if you can shift into love and an offering of kindness, an offering of understanding the concerns and addressing those, you're probably going to get a lot farther in life. And that's true of everyone, transgender community or not. It's true of everyone in life.